Why does it feel like you are being torn away from everything precisely at the moment when you needed connection the most? Because life often falls silent right before something profoundly important takes place. What if isolation were not abandonment at all, but a hidden ritual of preparation? What if those whom God truly intends to transform are first led into solitude? This is not a punishment, it is a summons. Carl Jung understood that transformation does not begin with clarity, but with withdrawal. Light, as many have sensed, only arrives after something deep inside has ended. You do not find peace by avoiding life, but by walking straight through its chaos. At some point, every human being looks around and realizes that no one is there anymore. Friends grow distant, routines dissolve, bonds loosen, and a strange silence settles in. It feels spiritual, heavy, and unsettling, more like a sentence than an invitation. Yet that silence carries meaning. What if that emptiness were not a void, but a threshold? What if the universe were clearing space so that something truer, something more essential, could finally emerge? Carl Jung devoted his life to understanding the language of the soul, and he discovered that before any genuine psychological transformation occurs, the soul retreats. It steps back from familiar faces, social roles, daily obligations. It chooses silence. It chooses solitude. This movement is not random. It is as precise as surgery. It is not chaos, but order disguised as collapse. As Jung wrote, within every chaos there is a hidden order, and within every emptiness there is a dormant meaning waiting to awaken. So perhaps you are not being punished. Perhaps you are being deprogrammed. Deprogrammed from the versions of yourself you created just to be accepted. Deprogrammed from the places where you shrank so that others would feel comfortable. Deprogrammed from expectations that kept you far away from who you truly are. Yes, it hurts. But this pain has a purpose. It exists to tear down the walls you once built to protect yourself, and that now only prevent your growth. This process is not gentle. It is raw and unfiltered. It is the kind of clarity that comes only after you have walked through the darkest interior night. There is grief in disappearing from the world. There is terror in no longer feeling needed. There is mourning for relationships that fade without explanation. But there is also a quiet, almost sacred beauty in rebirth. When you stop fighting the solitude and begin to listen, your loneliness starts to speak in a different language. Through reflection, metaphor, and uncomfortable truth, you are invited to see your isolation with new eyes. What you once called abandonment may actually be the precise moment when your true destiny began to whisper. There comes a point when everything starts to vanish without warning. First, the pauses in conversations, then the invitations that no longer arrive. The looks that once held warmth now pass over you as if you were invisible. Life seems to lose its color, and suddenly you find yourself standing alone in a world that no longer responds. Listen carefully. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Jung's deep exploration of the human unconscious revealed that the soul withdraws before a major transformation. Like a wounded animal that hides in order to heal, the psyche pulls away from the noise of the world to reorganize what has been damaged. The emptiness you feel is not a curse. It is sacred ground. What no one warned you about is that this ground feels like a desert. And in that desert, everything false within you begins to die. The desperate need to be approved of. The persona you built just to belong. The friendships that existed only to numb an ancient fear of abandonment. The promises you made against yourself so you would not be left. All of it starts to collapse, and with it comes a pain that has no clear shape but consumes you quietly. The loneliness you feel is not the absence of people. It is the absence of distractions. It is the exact moment when your soul demands that you stop running from yourself. This is when the void stops being a punishment and reveals itself as a teacher. Jung called this the process of individuation, a radical return to your true center. But for that to happen, the ego must fracture. It must stop being the sun around which everything revolves. And that only happens in emptiness. When there is no audience, you stop performing. When there is no one left to please, you finally ask yourself who you are when you no longer need to pretend. That question marks the beginning of awakening. But awakening is not soft. It is violent. It feels like a symbolic death, the death of who you thought you were. You miss the old version of yourself, even though that version lived exhausted. You miss people even when you know they never truly saw you. You feel the urge to return, even when you know it was never home. And here, you face the hardest choice of all. You can go back to what feels safe, but if you do, you will have to abandon yourself again. The void challenges you not to escape, not to settle for emotional scraps, not to cling to temporary attachments, just to avoid facing your own depth. It feels unbearable, but it is in that existential hollow that you meet yourself for the first time. It is there that you begin to hear your own voice, the one that was always present, but drowned out by the noise of the world. That voice speaks truths that hurt, yet liberate. You spent your life trying to be loved and forgot to love yourself. You searched for belonging and forgot to belong to yourself. In emptiness, the soul gives you back to you. And once that begins to happen, something inside you changes forever. You stop trying to complete yourself through others. You stop reshaping yourself to avoid rejection. You stop begging for spaces that only tolerated you. Slowly, you begin to choose yourself. The void shifts its form. It stops being absence and becomes presence, the presence of your wholeness. And that, no matter what happens in the world, is something no one can ever take away from you. Now tell me something. Have you ever felt that you give too much and still aren't respected? It's not because you don't try hard enough. It's because respect is not something you ask for. It's something you project. And that projection begins with how you train your mind to remain composed, cold, and focused in critical moments. Many people were raised with the idea that being good, being understanding, being agreeable was the right path. But that does not create strong individuals. It creates people who are easy to manipulate, people who confuse kindness with self-erasure. There is a model of mental self-control that is quietly being used by those who decided to stop pleasing others and start standing with presence. They didn't become cruel, they became solid. They learned that boundaries are not walls of aggression, but pillars of self-respect. You never notice the exact moment when your world begins to collapse. There is no alarm, no dramatic warning. It starts subtly, a slight distancing, a "we'll talk later" that never comes, a message seen but not answered, an invitation that never arrives, an absence that slowly gains weight, and you pretend not to feel it until one day everything goes quiet and you no longer know where you are or who you are. That is collapse. But it doesn't arrive with explosions. It arrives as a delicate and devastating emptiness. Carl Jung understood that true psychological transformation does not happen when everything is comfortable and stable. It happens when the structure of your reality begins to fail because it can no longer support the person you are becoming. That is why everything suddenly seems to be disappearing. Your job no longer makes sense. Your friendships no longer hold you. Your bed, your body, your routine feel like they belong to someone else. You look at your life and realize it no longer fits you. And then a silent question rises, echoing like a scream. When did I lose myself? But that question is not a sign of failure. It is the beginning of excavation. You are not getting lost. You are being unearthed. For years, you stacked layers on top of yourself. The role of the child, the friend, the worker, the partner, the good person, the strong one, the balanced one. You wore these masks so well that you eventually believed they were your face. Then the collapse came, and with it, the fall of those facades. Because there is a part of you, the most alive part, that never left. It was only suffocating, and now it is demanding space. That is what causes the silent collapse. It sweeps away the illusory to make room for the essential. Even if at first everything looks like emptiness, loss, and abandonment. You think you are losing people, but what you are actually losing are versions of yourself that no longer serve you. You believe the ground is disappearing beneath your feet, but it is only the old floor, built on constant concessions, that is cracking so something authentic can grow. Jung said that what you most need to find is located in the place you least want to look. And where is that place? Inside you, in that psychic center you avoided for so long through distractions, urgency, and superficial connections, in that uncomfortable silence that is not emptiness, but a mirror. It feels as if you are disappearing from the world, but in truth, it is the old world that is disappearing from you. Old connections, borrowed identities, relationships sustained by mutual lack are all collapsing because your soul grew tired of pretending. And when the soul is tired, it summons chaos. It destroys, silences, and erases so that what is essential can finally breathe. That is why you must stop fighting this collapse. It is not destroying you. It is revealing you. You are like a house under renovation. At first it looks as if everything is being torn down, but it is only the old plaster falling, the weak walls being removed. Soon the windows will open, light will enter, and then you will see it clearly. It was never the end. It was the beginning of building a new dwelling, a home within yourself. There is a strange pain that is not grief, not nostalgia, not ordinary anxiety. It is the pain that appears when you realize you spent your life playing a role that was never yours, when you finally understand that you were loved not for who you were, but for what you provided in return. Being useful, being easy, being agreeable, being everything except yourself. And then comes the tearing, a subtle but relentless breaking point. You can no longer laugh at empty jokes. You can no longer tolerate relationships that feed on your lack of boundaries. You can no longer perform the compliant version of yourself, the one that said yes when everything inside wanted to scream no. That moment is the beginning of individuation. Carl Jung described this process as the most sacred and the most painful path of the soul. To individuate is not to become special. On the contrary, it is to unlearn everything you thought you were until only what is real remains. And what is real was almost always hidden. Because being who you truly are in this world has a cost. You risk losing bonds. You risk making others uncomfortable precisely because you stopped rejecting yourself. But listen carefully. Every rupture on this path is a liberation in disguise. The relationships that break when you finally take your place were never truly about you. They were about the edited version of you that you offered in exchange for acceptance. And it is only when you stop editing your soul that the real trials begin. You will feel fear, fear of not being loved, fear that no one will be able to handle your wholeness, fear of discovering that your truth is lonely. But that fear is nothing more than the ego trying to keep the bars of the emotional prison where you learned to survive. Jung said, "What you resist persists. What you accept transforms." That is why this pain must be crossed, not denied. You must allow the old versions of yourself to die. You must look at yourself in the mirror and say, with tears in your eyes, "I am no longer who I was." And that is okay. The truth is that all healing requires betrayal. Betrayal of the family system that demanded blind obedience. Betrayal of friendships sustained by your passivity. Betrayal of the version of you that smiled just to survive. Do not be fooled. That betrayal is actually loyalty to your soul. The world will try to pull you back with invitations, subtle emotional manipulation, and memories of how much more pleasant you used to be. But you know better. You know that if you return, you will have to lose yourself again. So stay, even if it hurts, even if the silence is deafening, even if doubt visits you at night, whispering that surrender might be easier. The rupture is the point of no return, and it is precisely there that transformation begins. You no longer need to adapt. You no longer need to fit in. You no longer need to beg for affection. Your soul is tired of hiding its greatness to sustain fragile bonds. Let it go. Those who truly love you will find you in the new place where you stand. And those who cannot were only capable of loving your absence from yourself. Individuation is the death of the lie, and every death leaves behind a silence. But within that silence, you begin to hear the strangest and most sacred sound that exists, your own truth. Truth is simple, and it is cruel. For a long time, you did not truly love people. You loved mirrors. You loved reflections. You loved seeing in others the strength you believed you did not possess, the care you never gave yourself, the freedom you suppressed, the courage you buried, the joy you had forgotten how to feel. You looked at others the way someone looks into a dirty mirror and said to yourself, "That is what I am missing." And that is why it hurt so deeply when those people left. You did not lose them. You lost access to the parts of yourself that you had handed over to them. You lost the lightness you felt around them, the security you borrowed from them, the identity you outsourced to their presence. You had made them carriers of your own inner resources, and when they disappeared, it felt like something essential had been ripped away from you. Now there is no one left to carry those parts for you. This is the collapse of projections. Carl Jung once said that everything that irritates us in others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, and the same is true for everything we love excessively. We love in others what we have neglected within ourselves, and we hate in others what we are desperately trying to deny in silence. Love and rejection are not opposites here. They are two sides of the same unconscious mechanism. This is the moment when life, or the universe if you prefer, begins to shatter, one by one, the mirrors through which you learned to see yourself. Not out of cruelty, but out of a fierce kind of love. A love that is rough, uncomfortable, and deeply liberating. The soul understands something fundamental. As long as you only know yourself through the eyes of others, you remain captive, conditioned, fragmented, and vulnerable. That is why the mirrors must break. That friendship that made you feel special fades away. That relationship into which you poured all your strength comes to an end. That figure you admired as a guide, a reference, someone who seemed to give direction to your life, slowly disappears, and suddenly you find yourself alone in front of your own face, without reflection, without filters, without support. In that moment, a question arises like an acidic whisper. Can you see yourself without anyone's help? You think you are being abandoned, but in reality, you are being returned to yourself. And in that return, you realize how much of your identity you outsourced, how much you waited for someone else to say, "You are good, you matter, you are worthy." The soul grows tired of waiting. It begins to scream from the depths. What if you already were all of that, even if no one ever said it out loud? At first, this realization feels like nakedness. You want to run back to the first available mirror. Any person, any situation that offers a reflection capable of easing the pain of not knowing who you are without an audience. But something has changed. You have already seen how mirrors distort. You have noticed how they demand performance, how they reflect only what is pleasing and ignore everything else. You no longer want to look beautiful. You want to look whole. That is why life is now forcing you to look directly at yourself, without intermediaries, without distortions. And this requires courage, the courage to face the parts of yourself you have always rejected, the suppressed anger, the denied envy, the silenced desire, the vulnerability hidden behind masks. This is the work of integration. This is the task of sitting in front of yourself and saying, "Even so, I accept myself." The mirror has died, and with it has died the illusion that you need to become someone else in order to be loved. What is being born now is a different kind of gaze, not from the outside inward, but from the inside inward. It is no longer reflection. It is presence. The presence of someone who no longer needs to search for themselves in the eyes of others, because they have finally learned to see themselves in their own darkness. You no longer need to run. The desert broke you, cleansed you, stripped you of everything unnecessary. Not so you could reinvent yourself, but so you could finally encounter yourself. And that encounter, contrary to what many believe, is not euphoric or grand. It is quiet. It is shy. It feels like looking at a stranger and sensing an ancient familiarity, something deeply known and almost forgotten. That stranger is you, the real you, the one buried beneath countless masks, the one you sacrificed to be liked, to fit in, to avoid being abandoned. And now, in the center of this inner desert, where there are no mirrors, no spectators, no promises, you see yourself for the first time. Carl Jung said that the self is the regulating center of the psyche, the sacred core of being. But to reach it, one must pass through layer after layer of illusion, and almost always, one must be willing to lose everything that was false. Only then does what is real remain. That is what the desert represents, the radical solitude that comes before the essential revelation. You felt fear, you felt anger, you felt abandonment, like a final sentence. But now, something has shifted. You no longer need someone to arrive. You no longer wait to be completed. You no longer shape yourself to be chosen. You simply are. And in that state of being, there is a wisdom that was never found in books, never taught, never memorized. It emerges quietly, from lived experience, from nights that had no answers, from days where time felt suspended. You are enough, not as a motivational slogan or a comforting idea, but as an embodied truth, born from chaos, forged in absence, confirmed by silence itself. This is where destiny reveals itself, not as something that suddenly appears from the outside, but as something that was always here, patiently waiting for you to clear yourself enough to be able to see it. You thought destiny was a person, or a grand purpose, or a cosmic mission assigned to you by something greater. But destiny was never outside of you. Destiny was you, whole and undivided. You without concessions. You without masks. You at peace with your own presence. That is why now, when the universe finally returns, people to you, paths, opportunities, connections, you will not bow. You will not beg. You will not pretend. You will choose calmly and clearly, without fear of loss. Because you no longer operate from lack. You operate from wholeness. And whoever arrives now, if they arrive, will meet someone who no longer negotiates their own soul just to avoid being alone. You learned to love silence. You learned to rest within yourself. You learned to trust the absurd and perfect timing of life, even when it made no sense, even when it hurt. The desert that once looked like death was actually a birth. The emptiness that felt like punishment was sacred. The destiny that seemed distant was always within you. Now, with your feet firmly planted on the hot sand of your own presence, you can say without doubt and without fear, I am the home I was always searching for. Do you see it now? Nothing was random. Nothing was wasted. The silence was a calling. The solitude was a rite of passage. The loss was a purification. You were pulled away from the world so that the world would lose its power over you. And now, on the other side of the crossing, you understand. This was never about waiting for destiny to arrive with noise, promises, or applause. It was about becoming someone who recognizes what is real and no longer accepts what is false. You did not return to who you were. You became who you always were before everything was taught, demanded, imposed. That is true freedom. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of truth. The emptiness was never your enemy. It was simply space being cleared so that you could finally fit fully into yourself. And now that you occupy that space with quiet dignity, nothing needs to scream anymore. Let me tell you something. I was there too. In that dawn where no one responds, where the chest tightens and the mind screams, what is wrong with me? I wished to be less intense, less sensitive, less myself, until I realized that the problem was never my intensity, but where I was placing it. I was pouring sacred energy into places that could not hold it. Only when everything collapsed, truly collapsed, did something inside me speak, almost like a whisper. Now you are ready. Ready to stop being half of yourself just to fit into someone else's life. Ready to choose silence without desperation. Ready to stop apologizing for existing. If this video stayed with you until this moment, it is because you are ready too. Not perfect, not invulnerable, but conscious. And that changes everything.